Wait, hold on, what's happening here? I blurted out, stunned by my mother's urgent call for help. I had rushed home from work, only to find a moving truck parked outside our house. Whose things are being moved? I demanded. My parents, my husband Jimmy answered nonchalantly. Your parents? You made the decision to move them in without consulting me or my mother. My voice rose in anger, and on top of that you threw my mother out of her own home. I won't forgive you for this selfishness. You'll regret treating us like this. My name is Marital and I'm 28 years old. I met Jimmy at work, and we've been married for nearly 2 years. We live with my mother in her house, just the three of us. A few years back, my mother had an accident that left her with mobility issues. She can manage small tasks but still needs help, so we decided to live together for her well-being. In the beginning, Jimmy was supportive and considerate, but lately his selfishness had become unbearable. Jimmy, we need to take Mom to the hospital this Saturday. I reminded him. Huh, he muttered, barely looking at me. I haven't even finished talking, I snapped. Let me guess, you want me to take your mom to the hospital? I don't want to waste my day off, he interrupted. That's not what I was asking, I said, exasperated. I need you to stay home while I take her. Still not happening, he said bluntly. What? Why not? Because that's your responsibility as a housewife, he shrugged. Besides, I deserve my day off. A housewife? We both work, I reminded him. When we married, we agreed to support each other, including our mothers. But Jimmy never kept his promise, no matter how many times I brought it up. Eventually, he stopped caring and ignored me altogether. Despite returning home at the same time every day, he never lifted a finger to help. Instead, he would throw thoughtless remarks my way, knowing I was just as exhausted as he was. Hey, I'm starving. Is dinner ready yet? Why don't you just ask your mom to cook? She's home all day anyway, or we could just eat out. Just make sure you give me some cash, he would say. I tolerated his behavior for too long, but I knew a serious conversation was overdue. One morning, as I was making breakfast, my mother walked out of her room, looking unwell and covered in sweat. I rushed over. Mom, are you okay? I asked, worried. I'm just feeling a little warm, she said weakly. It's 82 degrees outside. Didn't you turn on the air conditioning? She hesitated before answering. Well, Jimmy told me not to. He said it wastes electricity. I froze. Excuse me? He told you not to use the AC. But it's scorching. That's dangerous. Fuming, I stormed into Jimmy's room. Jimmy, what were you thinking? What now? He groaned, already annoyed. You told my mom not to use the air conditioning. How could you be so heartless? Heartless? We're the ones paying the bills. Why should we waste money unnecessarily? Unnecessarily? What if she gets sick? I snapped. You're exaggerating, Marital. All you ever think about is your mother. What about my feelings? He shot back. What? I've been considering our future, the family we'll have, something you never seem to think about. You're always prioritizing your mother. We're not even talking about that right now. If your mother is so important to you, maybe you should just focus on her instead of me, he scoffed. Then, as if dismissing the conversation entirely, he threw a pillow at me and lay down to sleep. I was stunned. Our home didn't have rent because my mother built it for us. She even covered property taxes and gave us a monthly allowance, something Jimmy was well aware of. I never expected him to be grateful, but at the very least I wished he would show some respect. This conversation wasn't over. I sighed as I sank into the bathtub, trying to cool my frustration. A few days later, while at work, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. Mom? Why are you calling now? She rarely called during my work hours. A sense of unease crept in as I picked up. Mom, is everything okay? Marital, help me, she cried. What? What's going on? My heart pounded. Jimmy brought his parents over and something terrible happened, she sobbed. Wait, what? Jimmy moved his parents in? Before I could process what she was saying, I heard Jimmy's voice in the background. Hey, I told you not to call Marital, he snapped. But Jimmy, this is serious. You're being annoying. Just hang up already. Wait, Jimmy, give me the phone back, my mother pleaded. Then the call ended. I stared at my phone, frozen in shock. This wasn't normal. Something was very, very wrong. I immediately informed my boss and rushed home. The sight that greeted me made my blood boil. Whoa, whoa, what is going on here? I shouted, seeing the moving truck outside and Jimmy directing the movers. I stormed up to him. Hey, whose things are these? Marital, you're back, he said, feigning surprise. Answer me, whose stuff is being moved? My parents, they've been struggling, so I invited them to live with us. You what? Without even talking to me? This is my mother's house too. You can't just decide something like this on your own. Jimmy shrugged, acting as if this was no big deal. If I had told you, you would have refused. That's why I didn't bother asking. My anger boiled over. You seriously thought that was a good excuse? Neither my mother nor I agreed to this. You can't just bulldoze your way into decisions that affect all of us. You're overreacting. What's done is done, he said dismissively. Not a chance. Your parents need to leave. I shot back. Wow, you're seriously kicking them out? That's low, he sneered. Low? You're the one who forced them in here without permission. I have no obligation to accommodate your family when you don't even respect mine. Jimmy then had the audacity to say something even more absurd. Think about it, Marital. My parents are healthy and capable. They're a better investment for the future than your mother. We should be looking after them instead. I stared at him, utterly speechless. Was this really the man I married? I mean, we should put my parents first. They're more dependable, Jimmy insisted. I stared at him in disbelief. Before we got married, he had told me about his parents' gambling addiction. How could he possibly consider them reliable for the future? So, you're saying we should prioritize your parents over my mother? And you expect me to just accept that? I repeated, barely able to contain my frustration. When I glanced at my mother's sorrowful face, my anger boiled over. Enough. Have you completely lost your mind? This is my mother's house. Jimmy remained stubborn, shaking his head. Listen, this isn't just her house. It's yours too, since you're her daughter. And as your husband, it's also mine. That's how it works, right? Oh, I understand just fine, I shot back. My mother built this house and still pays the property taxes, yet you had the audacity to move your parents in without permission, and now you expect my mother to leave. Where do you get off coming up with such a ridiculous idea? Jimmy scoffed. Wow, so now I'm the ridiculous one. You just don't get it. My parents are a better investment for the future than your disabled mother, who, let's be honest, doesn't have much time left anyway. I felt my whole body shake with rage. What the hell did you just say? I was ready to tear into him, but my mother gently held my arm. Marital, calm down. But Mom, it's fine, she said softly. Let's just leave. Then she turned to Jimmy and his parents. Jimmy, I don't mind if your parents stay here for now. If they're really struggling, they can stay until they find jobs. But once they do, they need to leave. That was the agreement, wasn't it? Jimmy hesitated before forcing a guilty expression. Yeah, my dad lost his job, and we've been struggling. I see, my mother replied calmly. Then they have 1 month. Make sure your father finds work by then. Understood? Jimmy nodded reluctantly. Yeah. Thanks. I didn't bite his act for a second. I could already tell that if we left them alone, they'd try to take over the house entirely. But seeing my mother so composed, I decided to trust her judgment. As we packed our bags, I whispered, Mom, are you sure about this? Something feels off. It's fine, Marital, she assured me with a small smile. Just trust me. And whatever you do, don't reach out to them first. Let them come to us. Her words carried an eerie sense of certainty. Huh? What do you mean? I asked, puzzled. She just sipped her tea and shrugged. You'll see. And she was right. 2 months later, my phone rang. It was Jimmy. Marital, you have to help us. Oh, it's been a while, I said coolly. What's wrong? You sound panicked. It's not just a small issue. The electricity, water, and gas all got shut off. We can't do anything, he cried. I couldn't help but smirk. Well, that makes sense, I replied, since I was the one paying those bills, and I stopped. Why would they still be running? What? You stopped paying? You did this on purpose? Jimmy shouted in shock. Of course. We gave you a month, didn't we? And yet, you're still living there. That must mean your parents haven't found jobs yet, right? I asked pointedly. Silence. Well, they've been trying, he muttered. Oh, really? I said, feigning surprise. Because according to my mother, who, by the way, has been keeping an eye on things, your parents have been going to the casino every day instead of job hunting. What? No way. I gave them money for their daily expenses. Yeah, and they gambled it all away, every last cent. Jimmy stammered, unable to process what I was saying. Whatever, just fix the utilities already. We can't survive in this heat, he whined. I let out a dry laugh. Oh, funny. Didn't you tell my mother not to use the air conditioning because it was a waste of electricity? You didn't care about her comfort, so why should I care about yours? You can't talk to me like that. I'm your husband, he snapped. And yet you've done nothing but mooch off my mother while treating her like she's disposable. You've been acting so entitled, but have you even thought about your own future? If you keep this up, things will only get worse for you. Shut up. If you don't fix this, I'll consider divorcing you, Jimmy threatened. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, divorce? Hearing my reaction, Jimmy laughed, thinking he had the upper hand. Yeah. You don't want that, do you? So just reconnect the utilities and we can move on from this. I smiled. Actually, I've already decided to divorce you. The line went dead silent. Do what? Jimmy finally choked out. I wasn't going to stay trapped in this toxic marriage. There was no point in wasting another second on him. The utilities will remain off until you and your parents leave that house. If you want to keep suffering, that's your choice. Wait. Don't ever contact me again. And with that, I hung up. I ignored all his frantic calls and texts after that. A week later, they finally caved. Unable to survive without electricity, water, or gas, Jimmy and his parents packed up and left. The divorce process was smooth, and soon my mother and I returned to our rightful home. Peace and quiet finally settled back into our lives. As for Jimmy and his parents, they're now crammed into a tiny apartment, barely scraping by. His salary alone isn't enough to support them, and they're still struggling to find work. They never appreciated what they had, and that's why they ended up with nothing. As for me and my mother, we're living happily, just the two of us, free from all the chaos. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Stay tuned.